I was forbidden from the Alpha's mating ceremony, until the Alpha King realized I was the one missing. The kitchen of the Thornridge pack house smelled like burnt sugar and candle wax, and Mira Voss had learned to love that smell because it was the only thing in the whole building that never lied to her. Upstairs, the grand hall was filling with silver dresses and pine smoke perfume. Tonight was the mating ceremony, the night the Alpha King would choose his bonded mate from the pack's eligible daughters, and every single one of those daughters had spent the last 3 months preparing for it, like it was the only night of their lives that mattered. Maybe it was. Mira wouldn't know. She had never been invited to a night like that. She had never been invited to anything. She stood at the sink with her hands in warm water, washing a pot that didn't need washing, just to have something to do with her hands. Through the window above the sink she could see slivers of candlelight from the hall, distorted by old glass, shaking like something underwater. She could hear the music start, a slow, formal piece, the kind played only once a year, only for this. Her mother used to hum that same song when Mira was small, back when her mother was still alive and still hopeful that being human wouldn't matter, that loving a wolf and having his daughter would be enough to earn a place in his world. It hadn't been enough. Mira's father died in a border skirmish before she turned 4, and after that, nobody in Thornridge quite knew what to do with a half-blood girl whose only claim to the pack was a dead man's blood and a human mother's stubbornness. So they gave her a job in the kitchen, and they let her sleep in a small room off the pantry, and they mostly forgot she existed. 6 years of that. Long enough that forgetting had started to feel less like an insult and more like weather, something you just lived inside of. She dried her hands on her apron and told herself she didn't care that the music was starting without her. She told herself a lot of things like that. Most nights she almost believed them. Upstairs, in the grand hall, Alpha King Ronan Draeger stood at the front of the room in his ceremonial coat, half listening to the pack elders murmur behind him, and feeling something he had no name for. Ronan was not a man who felt things without knowing exactly what they were. He had led Thornridge since he was 26, had buried his father and stepped into the role before he was ready, and in the 11 years since, he had built a reputation as a leader who did not waste time on confusion. He decided things. He acted. His wolf was old and steady and rarely spoke. But tonight, from the moment the candles were lit, something in his chest had been humming wrong, like a string pulled slightly out of tune. He had assumed it was nerves. Alphas were not supposed to have nerves, but he had never actually chosen a mate before. Not really. Not with his own eyes and his own gut, instead of a council's recommendation, and maybe that alone was enough to make even a steady man feel unsteady. But as the ceremony went on, as the eligible daughters of Thornridge were presented one by one in their silver dresses, the humming did not go away. It got louder. It stopped feeling like nerves and started feeling like something else, like a word on the tip of his tongue, like a name he almost remembered. He was midway through a sentence, something polite and ceremonial, something about honoring the pack's daughters, when he simply stopped. The room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when its leader stops making sense. Councilwoman Isolde, standing near the front with her daughter Talia, beside her in the finest dress in the hall, leaned forward slightly, her sharp eyes narrowing. "My Alpha," she said. Ronan didn't answer right away. He was listening to something none of them could hear, the pack bond, the ancient thread that tied an Alpha to his territory and to every wolf under his protection. It was singing wrong tonight, and now, standing in a room full of every eligible woman in Thornridge, he understood why. Someone was missing, not missing like late, missing like absent from a count that should have included her and never had. "Someone isn't here," he said slowly, and the words felt strange in his mouth, too large, too true. "Someone who should be." The elders exchanged glances. Isolde's mouth thinned into something that wasn't quite a smile. "My Alpha, every eligible daughter of Thornridge is present tonight. The list was reviewed 3 times. "Then the list is wrong," Ronan said. He didn't know how he knew that. He only knew that the humming in his chest was not going to stop, that it was pulling at him now like a hook set deep, and that if he stood in this hall one more minute, pretending it wasn't happening, he was going to lose something he hadn't even found yet. He left the dais. He left the ceremony. He walked out of the grand hall with 200 wolves watching him go, and not one of them brave enough to ask where. He didn't know where he was going either. He just followed the pull. It led him down a hallway he hadn't walked in years, past the formal rooms and into the working part of the house, past the laundry and the stores, until he reached a door that smelled like burnt sugar and candle wax and something underneath that made his whole body go still. He pushed it open. Mira was standing at the sink, a copper pot in her hands, and when she turned and saw the Alpha King filling the doorway of her kitchen in his ceremonial coat, the pot slipped out of her fingers and hit the floor with a crash that felt, to both of them, like the end of something and the beginning of something else at exactly the same time. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Ronan didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. The wrongness that had been humming in his chest all night resolved the second their eyes met, snapped into place with a force that nearly knocked the breath out of him, a chord finally landing after searching for its note. He felt it settle behind his ribs like a hook catching, pulling tight, and he understood, with the kind of certainty that didn't need explaining, that he was looking at his mate. Mira felt it too, a pull behind her sternum, sudden and undeniable, reeling her toward a man she had exchanged maybe 6 words with in her entire life. Her wolf, the small, quiet, half-formed thing inside her that she rarely let herself acknowledge because acknowledging it only reminded her of everything she wasn't allowed to have, sat up inside her for the first time in years. Alert, certain, hers. Neither of them said the word. They didn't have to. It sat in the room between them, obvious as the broken pot on the floor. "You're the one who's missing," Ronan said finally, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Mira wiped her hands on her apron, mostly to have something to do, because her heart was doing something complicated and loud in her chest, and she needed a second to catch up to it. "Missing from what? I was never invited. You are now." That's not how invitations work. She bent to pick up the pot, using the motion as an excuse to look away from him, because looking at him was doing something to her thinking, scrambling it. You can't just decide, in the middle of a ceremony, that the girl who scrubs your pots is... She stopped herself before she said the word. It felt too big for the kitchen. Too big for her, maybe. "Say it," Ronan said quietly. "No, Mira. You don't know my name," she said, startled, and it came out sharper than she meant. "I do now," he said. "I think I always did. I just didn't have a reason to say it out loud." She stared at him. 6 years of being invisible had taught her a lot of things, and one of them was how to recognize when a powerful man was about to make her life more complicated instead of less. She didn't know yet whether Ronan Drager was that kind of man or a different kind entirely. She only knew that the pull in her chest didn't seem to care about the difference, and that scared her more than anything else in the room. Word travels fast in a pack house, and by the time Ronan led Mira back toward the grand hall, not dragging her, not ordering her, just walking beside her and letting her set her own pace, which was its own kind of statement, the entire pack already knew something had happened. 200 wolves stood in near silence as their Alpha King walked in with a kitchen girl at his side, her apron still dusted with flour, her hands still faintly pink from dishwater. Isolde was the first to speak, and her voice carried the particular sweetness of someone who has already decided to destroy you and is only choosing her words for effect. "My Alpha, surely you understand the position this puts us in." "I understand exactly what position it puts us in," Ronan said. "My mate is standing beside me." A murmur went through the hall like wind through dry grass. "With respect," Isolde continued, "the girl is a half-blood. Her mother was human. There is no verified lineage, no proper claim to—" "There's a bond," Ronan said. "You felt the ceremony break tonight. Every wolf in this room felt it. That's not something the council votes on." "The council votes on everything," Isolde said, and for the first time her sweetness slipped, showing the steel underneath. Her daughter Talia stood beside her, silent, her face carefully arranged into something that might have been disappointment or might have been relief. It was hard to tell, and nobody was looking closely enough at Talia to find out. Mira felt every eye in the room on her, weighing her, and it took everything she had not to walk straight back out the door she'd come through. 6 years of invisibility had at least been comfortable in its way. This, being seen, being argued over like a piece of disputed property, was a different kind of exposure, and she wasn't sure yet that she wanted it. "I don't need the council to vote on me," she said, and her voice, to her own surprise, came out steady. "I never asked to be here." That silenced the room more effectively than anything Ronan had said. He turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I didn't ask for this," Mira went on, looking at Isolde now, and then at the rest of the hall, at the pack that had spent 6 years walking past her like she was furniture. "I didn't ask to be found tonight, and I definitely didn't ask to be found in front of everyone who's spent 6 years pretending I don't exist. So don't stand there and act like I'm the problem in this room. I'm the one who's been paying for a decision I never made." Nobody answered that. Ronan, for his part, didn't try to smooth it over, didn't apologize for her, didn't tell her to calm down. He just stood there and let her words sit in the air, because he understood, somewhere underneath the shock of the night, that she was right to say them. "The ceremony is concluded for tonight," he said finally, to the room at large. "Nothing will be decided about my mate's place in this pack, until I say it is. Go home." It wasn't a suggestion. 200 wolves filed out of the grand hall, in a silence that felt less like respect and more like held breath. Mira didn't go home, because home, for her, was a small room off the pantry, and she wasn't ready yet to be alone with everything that had just happened. Instead, she found herself outside in the courtyard, the cold air a relief after the heat and noise of the hall, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. She heard the door open behind her and didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "You don't have to follow me," she said. "I know." Ronan came to stand a few feet away, giving her space, which she noticed and which surprised her. "I wanted to anyway." "Why?" "Because I felt what happened in there. To you. Watching everyone argue about whether you're allowed to exist." His jaw tightened. "That's not a small thing. I'm not going to pretend it is." Mira let out a breath that fogged in the cold air. "You want to know something funny? I'm not even angry at Isolde. She's exactly who she's always been. I'm angry at the 6 years before tonight. All the ceremonies I wasn't invited to because somebody, a long time before Isolde, decided a half-blood girl wasn't worth counting. You didn't do that, but you're the one standing here now, and it's easier to be angry at the person in front of me than the whole history behind him." "That's fair," Ronan said. "You can be angry at me too, if it helps. I've got broad shoulders." That surprised a short, unwilling laugh out of her, and she looked at him properly for the first time since the kitchen. Really looked, not just registered him as the Alpha King, the man from the ceremony, the source of the pull in her chest, but as a person standing in a cold courtyard at midnight, patiently absorbing her anger because he understood she'd earned the right to it. "I'm not grateful," she said, because she felt like he needed to hear it plainly. "I know that's probably what you're expecting. The scullery girl gets rescued, gets swept up into the palace, falls all over herself, thanking the handsome Alpha. That's not what this is for me. This isn't a gift. It's a correction, 6 years too late, and I don't know yet if I even want it." "I'm not expecting gratitude," Ronan said. "I don't think I've earned it. I can't undo 6 years I wasn't paying attention to. I didn't know you existed until tonight, and that's on me, whatever the reasons were. All I can do now is not look away again." "That's a nice sentence," Mira said. "Let's see if it's true." "Fair enough," he said, and something like a smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "I'll take the test." The weeks that followed were not the fairy tale the pack gossip made them out to be. Word of a kitchen girl turned Alpha's mate spread through Thornridge and beyond it within days, and with the spread came exactly the kind of scrutiny Mira had spent 6 years successfully avoiding. People stared at her in the hallways now instead of walking past her. Some of them stared with curiosity, some with open resentment, and a few, mostly older wolves who remembered her mother, stared with something that looked almost like guilt. Isolde did not give up. That much became clear within the first week, when Mira found her personal room, a modest guest chamber Ronan had insisted she take, though she'd fought him on it for 2 days before finally accepting, mostly because arguing about furniture felt easier than arguing about everything else, had been searched. Nothing was taken, but a few of her mother's old letters, kept in a small box under the bed, had been moved, refolded slightly wrong, in a way that told Mira someone had read them and wanted her to know it. She brought it straight to Ronan, more out of fury than fear. "I know it was her," Mira said, pacing his study while he watched from behind his desk, arms crossed, jaw tight in a way that told her he believed her without needing proof. "I can't say it in the council chamber because I don't have anything except a box of letters that got moved, but I know." "I believe you," Ronan said, "and I'm not going to let it happen again. I don't need you to fight this for me." "I'm not fighting it for you," he said. "I'm putting a guard on the guest wing, which is something I'd do for any pack member whose room got searched, mate or not. Fighting your actual battles is your job. I learned that the hard way already, the night we met, when you told an entire hall exactly what you thought of them." Mira stopped pacing. "You're not going to try to handle this for me." "No," Ronan said. "I'm going to stand next to you while you handle it. There's a difference, and I think you already know it, because you'd have thrown something at me by now if I'd tried the other way." She almost smiled. "Almost. I would have. I know. I've seen you with pots." That got the smile out of her properly, unwilling and quick, gone as fast as it came, but real. Over the following month, something began to shift, quietly, in the spaces between the political fights. Ronan showed her the territory, not as a grand tour meant to impress her, but in ordinary pieces, the way you'd show someone around a life you were hoping they'd want to stay in. The ridge where the pack ran during the full moon. The old orchard behind the training grounds, half wild now, where his mother used to keep bees before she died. The quiet spot by the river where he went when the weight of being alpha got to be too much for one man to carry silently. He never asked Mira to talk about her own past, not directly. He waited for her to offer it, and when she did, in small pieces, over weeks, he never pushed for more than she gave. "My mother used to hum," she told him once, sitting by that same river, watching the water instead of him, because it was easier. The song they played at the ceremony. "The night you found me." She used to hum it when I was small, before my father died. I hadn't heard it in years. Ronan didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that must have been strange, hearing it again that night, of all nights. It was. She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I think that's part of why I couldn't stop crying in the kitchen after everyone left. Not because of you, or the council, or any of it. Because for about 30 seconds, before the pot broke, I was standing in that kitchen listening to my mother's song, and I let myself miss her properly for the first time in years." "You don't have to explain grief to me like it needs a good reason," Ronan said quietly. "I lost my father the same year I became alpha. Some days I still catch myself about to ask him something before I remember he's not in the next room anymore." They sat with that for a while, neither of them needing to fill the silence, and something about the quiet felt less like the invisibility Mira had lived inside for 6 years, and more like being known. It wasn't all quiet rivers and slow trust, though. Isolde's next move came at the pack's founding feast, the one event of the year where every wolf in Thornridge, from the oldest elder to the youngest pup, gathered under one roof. It was, Mira understood immediately, the most public possible stage for whatever Isolde had planned. She stood up midway through the feast, silver goblet in hand, and called for the pack's attention with the easy authority of a woman who had spent 30 years learning exactly how to command a room. "Before we continue," Isolde said, "I think this pack deserves clarity. We have all heard the claim that this girl," she gestured toward Mira without looking at her directly, a small cruelty dressed up as formality, carries a true bond with our alpha. I do not doubt what the alpha felt that night, but I do doubt whether a half-blood's claim can hold under the old rights. I propose a verification. Let the land itself confirm or deny what we've been told to accept on faith. A murmur rolled through the hall. Mira felt her pulse spike, not from fear exactly, but from the particular fury of watching someone try, again, to make her prove she was allowed to exist. She stood before Ronan could. "Fine," Mira said, and her voice carried clean across the hall, steadier than she felt. "Let's do it." Ronan's hand found hers under the table for half a second, not stopping her, just letting her know he was there, before she pulled gently away and walked to the center of the hall on her own. The old rites of Thornridge were not something Mira had ever been taught, being a half-blood raised in a kitchen instead of a council chamber, but she'd heard enough kitchen gossip over 6 years to understand the shape of it. The territory itself, the ancient land the pack was bonded to, was said to answer true claims and reject false ones. It was old magic, half forgotten, rarely invoked because it was considered too unpredictable to trust for anything but the gravest disputes. Isolde had chosen it precisely because it was the one thing even an Alpha King couldn't argue with or override. An elder Mira didn't recognize stepped forward with a shallow stone bowl and a small blade, and explained, in a flat ceremonial voice, what would happen. A few drops of Mira's blood in the bowl, mixed with a handful of soil carried in from the ridge, and the land would answer, in whatever old, wordless way it answered these things. If she was a false claim, the mixture would simply sit still, inert, empty. If she was true, the pack would feel it, a ripple through the bond that connected every wolf in Thornridge to the ground beneath them. Mira didn't hesitate. She held out her hand and let the blade nick her palm, watched 3 dark drops fall into the bowl of pale soil, and stood very still while the elder stirred them together with a wooden rod. For a moment, nothing happened. Isolde's mouth curved, just slightly, the beginning of a satisfied smile. Then the soil in the bowl darkened, all at once, like a held breath finally releasing, and every single wolf in the hall felt it at the same instant. A warmth moving through the floor, through the walls, through the old stones of a pack house that had stood for 300 years, as though the land itself had reached up and wrapped around Mira's ankles and said, plainly, in the only language it had, "Hers, hers, hers." Somewhere in the back of the hall, an old wolf, who remembered Mira's mother, began to cry. Isolde did not cry. Her face went carefully, dangerously blank, the practiced blankness of someone who has just lost a 30-year argument in front of the entire audience she needed to win it for. She didn't apologize. She sat down, and she did not speak again for the rest of the feast. And that, Mira understood, was as close to a surrender as a woman like Isolde was ever going to give. Ronan crossed the hall and stood beside Mira, not touching her, just present, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him next to the lingering warmth of the land's answer still humming faintly under her feet. "You didn't need me to fight that one either," he said quietly, "just for her." "No," Mira agreed, "but I'm glad you were standing close enough to catch me if it had gone the other way." "Always," he said, and it wasn't a grand promise, wasn't dressed up in ceremony or old rites. It was just true, the way the simplest things usually are. The pack accepted her after that. Not all at once, not perfectly, because 6 years of invisibility doesn't undo itself in a single evening no matter what the land says, but steadily, the way trust usually arrives, one small, ordinary moment at a time. Wolves who had walked past her in the hallway for years started nodding to her instead. Younger pack members, curious rather than cruel, began finding excuses to talk to her, to ask about her mother, to ask what it had been like growing up half in the pack and half out of it. She answered honestly, without softening the hard parts, because she'd decided somewhere in that courtyard on the first cold night that she wasn't going to make her history smaller just to make other people comfortable with it. Talia, of all people, was the one who eventually apologized, quietly, awkwardly, cornering Mira in the garden one afternoon, weeks after the feast. "I didn't want to be Luna," Talia admitted, twisting her hands together. I never wanted any of what my mother was fighting for. I just didn't know how to tell her that, without it costing me everything. I'm sorry it cost you instead. Mira, who understood better than most people in that pack house what it meant to be quietly erased by someone else's plans for your life, found she couldn't stay angry at a girl who'd been fighting a version of the same battle from the other side of it. "Thank you for saying that," Mira said, and meant it. Life at Thornridge didn't become simple after that, because leading a pack was never going to be simple, and being a half-blood Luna in a pack that had spent generations building rules to keep girls like her out came with its own slow, ongoing work. Conversations with elders, small fights won one at a time, the occasional bitter comment from someone who hadn't caught up yet to what the land had already decided. But it became hers. That was the difference. Every hard conversation, every small victory, every quiet evening by the river belonged to a life she had chosen to build, rather than one that had simply happened to her. Months later, on an ordinary evening with no ceremony attached to it at all, Ronan found Mira back in the kitchen, not out of habit born of old invisibility, but because she'd started teaching a group of young pack members to cook, something she'd discovered she genuinely loved once nobody was forcing her to do it in a small room off the pantry with the door shut. Flour dusted the counter. Someone had spilled something sticky near the stove. The room smelled, as it always had, like burnt sugar and candle wax, except now the smell meant something different to her. It meant this was hers by choice. Ronan didn't pull her out of it. He rolled up his sleeves, found an apron hanging by the door, and stepped in beside her at the counter, earning a startled laugh from the pack's younger cooks at the sight of their Alpha King fumbling with a mixing bowl. "You don't have to do this," Mira said, amused, handing him a spoon he was clearly holding wrong. "I know," Ronan said. "I want to anyway." It was, she realized, the exact same thing he'd said to her that very first night in the courtyard, and this time she didn't have to wonder whether it was true. She'd watched it prove itself, one ordinary evening at a time, for months. The girl who had once been forbidden from even standing in the same room as the ceremony was now the reason the whole pack house felt, for the first time in years, like somewhere worth being seen in. The end.